Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Apologies for the slight delay. The scourge of load shedding has struck the CIAG. But let's get started, and I guess we're all used to making plans around that. This is the first time we've done this Q&A session, and we're going to try and do this once a month, just to give people who follow Cape Independent. Right, apologies, sorry, technical issue there. So yeah, look, this is the first time we're going to run this. We're going to try and do this one to give people I'm very, very sorry. We're having some technical issues where I'm hearing myself back in my in my ear, but with about a 10-second delay, which is making it almost impossible to talk. Just give me a second. Let's find a solution here. Let's try this way here. Okay. Right, hopefully you can still hear me. Apologies for that. Like I say, this is the first time that we've done this one, and we're starting to run into some minor technical issues here. So for the technical team in the background here, I now can't hear you. I've got no sound. That's fine. I'm just going to speak, but obviously, if you want to send me a message, then please just do so by putting it up on the screen. Look, just to give you then some background in terms of where we are with Cape Independence at the moment. An awful lot is happening at the moment behind the scenes. Clearly, the spectre of 2024 is looming quite large as we look forward to what lies ahead. The sort of the quick and the spicy version is, we've spent, as an organisation, the CIAG has spent the last 3 years in discussions with many political parties, but obviously the primary focus of that has been around the DA, given that the DA is the only party that can call a referendum on Cape Independence. That's our primary objective, and therefore, we need to either convince them or put enough pressure on the DA so that Premier Alan Winde does so. We did secure an agreement in 2021 before the last election. The DA would hold a referendum on Cape Independence. You've probably seen from our social media feeds that ultimately they haven't yet called that referendum, and there's been quite a lot of stuff going on in the background, which probably has not been ideal. Can I say sort of slightly underhand, without being unduly unfair to the DA. That has led us to running this current public campaign in terms of, we just can't let the DA sit on this fence any longer with a referendum legislation and the calling of a referendum. So effectively, we've got a situation at the moment where the DA have deliberately caused delays in the referendum legislation and are then blaming the delay in referendum legislation as the reason why they can't make a decision or can't call a referendum on Cape Independence. But our belief is that they don't want to call a referendum on Cape Independence. When we made the agreement in 2021, the timeline the DA gave then was 6 months for that legislation to be passed. We would have anticipated the referendum called in 2022. Here we are towards the end of 2023. That legislation at best passed in 2024, and even then, perhaps is looking a little unlikely. So, we simply can't wait any longer. Now, there are other ways. In fact, this referendum legislation isn't necessarily essential at all. It's just the DA's option to pass that. And the context that Premier Winde had 2 legal opinions put on his desk. One legal opinion said he could call a referendum on Cape Independence now, and the other said that he couldn't. And he's chosen to take the one that says he couldn't, and then try and fix the legislation from there, because that, and ultimately, from saying, well, look, let's just use the one we can, and it followed our election campaign or our referendum campaign at the moment. We're asking the president call that Winde asks for the referendum, but the president to actually call it, which then removes any issues whatsoever around the ability for a referendum to be called. So that's where we're calling for now, and we're deliberately calling for this referendum to be held on election day 2024. We're going to hand over that letter. About this point in time, about 30,000 people have signed that over the last 3.5 weeks, which is an excellent number. And we're going to hand that over on the 3rd of October. And we're going to give Premier Windy 7 days to say, is he going to call a referendum on election day or is he not? And at that point, we're going to call that negotiation with the DA done. Either they're going to call a referendum or they're not going to call a referendum. We then know where we stand and we can move forward accordingly. While that's been handed over officially on the 3rd, we've already supplied a copy of that letter to the Premier, so he knows it's coming. So he isn't just being given 7 days, but I mean, in a formal context, he's been given 7 days. So that's kind of where we are with that, and on all of our platforms, that's what we're currently pushing at the moment. When we move past, then once we've got the DA's decision, then we have to decide what are we going to do next. Our assumption at this point in time is the Premier is not going to call the referendum, and then we look forward to 2024. And effectively at that point in time, if we want to have a referendum on Cape Independence, then supporters of Cape Independence are going to have to vote for it. And we need to find a range of voting options that allow people to do so. And that's in the sort of background space at the moment. We're doing an extraordinarily hard amount of work, a large amount of work on that. We're working closely with the Freedom Front Plus. We'll continue, and we'll. Thank you, Joe, that we're having that. Let me try. Should I try a different different internet connection? Just try here. So we're trying as hard as we can with that. We're working with working with the Freedom Front Plus. The Cape Independence Party to an extent, but we have concerns that the Cape Independence Party have not really been able to make significant headway, and I think there are some reasons behind that. One of the things that we absolutely are going to have to do if we are going to pressure the DA in 2024 for a referendum is to challenge them electorally, and we're working on an alternative political solution. We're doing that in conjunction with the Freedom Front Plus and the Cape Independence Party, and if the Premier Windy doesn't agree to call a referendum, then quite quickly afterwards you're going to see the announcement of another single issue political party, which is going to focus particularly on the DA. It's where the other parties are obviously slightly antagonistic towards the DA. Then this one will probably be aimed, but not probably, it will be aimed specifically at DA voters. It won't be aimed at removing the DA from power, but it will be aimed at forcing the DA to listen to its own voters, because we know that 79% of DA voters from our recent polling and previous polling, support the idea of a referendum on Cape Independence. So that's kind of where we are at this point in time. We're forcing this referendum decision to some sort of conclusion, which gives us plenty of time to go into the 2024 election. There's another political formation waiting in the wings, which will partner up with the existing formations to make sure there's a full range of voting options for people going into 2024. So that if the DA don't voluntarily call a referendum on Cape Independence, we can then force them into calling that referendum politically. But obviously, if we go this route and we go down the electoral route, then ultimately the responsibility then falls back onto Western Cape voters. And if people want Cape Independence, then obviously we're going to have to convince them, or they're going to have to vote for it. Because if they don't vote for it, then obviously we have nothing left to finish the day with. So that's the gist of where we are. So in terms of questions, please feel free to ask anything. No question is stupid. Just ask away. Don't worry about offending us in any way, shape, or form. Bring the questions on, and let's have a frank discussion. So I'm not sure if we've got any questions yet. Joan, do we have any questions to start with? Let me just put my headphones on and then see if I can hear anything there and there. There we go. The DI are well aware if the Cape Townians decide to secede, they will become a relevant countrywide. Well, and I think look, it's one of the situations we're absolutely clear with the DA that there are some conflicts here. The DA often say to us privately that 70% of their voters are based outside of the Western Cape. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why they are particularly cautious around the messaging, and we understand that. But at the same time, when we elect a Western Cape government, we elect it to serve the people of the Western Cape, and it certainly isn't supposed to be that the Western Cape Premier is worrying about voters outside of the rest of the country. So you're quite right, MR64. That absolutely is a factor, but it shouldn't be a factor. And in many ways, it's the DI very critical of the ANC not being able to separate party and state, but the DA in this situation need to do the same. In the Western Cape, we must vote for what we want, and they must serve the Western Cape voters, and their interests outside of the Western Cape shouldn't be our consideration. But that's practical, unfortunately. Just waiting to see. Sorry, I appreciate I haven't got any sound at the moment. I'm taking the earphones out, so I'm just waiting for the question to appear on the screen, the same as you are. What are our concerns about Cape independence? Well, I don't think we have any concerns about Cape independence. Thank you for the question. I think we clearly are for Cape independence. We think it's an excellent solution. Actually, we think it's the only solution. And one of the campaign messages that we'll absolutely take if we do choose to challenge the DA electorally will be a message that says it doesn't really matter if you have a DA government in the Western Cape. If you end up with an ANC government in Pretoria making all of the decisions, and we're going to focus on a number of key issues and try to help people to realise that the DA have done a good job largely in the Western Cape. We would recognise that most Cape independence supporters aren't actually looking to remove the DA. But we can take these specific issues. So, for example, policing, if we want to deal with crime issues in the Western Cape, but it doesn't really help whatever policies we have in the Western Cape if all police are controlled out of Pretoria. If we want to grow the economy and create economic growth and jobs and prosperity, then we need to have control of economic policy. And again, a DA government in the Western Cape can do nothing about that if there's an ANC government in Pretoria that's making all of the decisions. And I think the key thing about Cape independence now is to make sure that what Cape independence delivers. It delivers control to the Western Cape government, the government that we elect, and it allows us ultimately to close the border to control, so we can focus our efforts on the people of the Western Cape. Thanks, Chris. Look, great question, and one that comes a lot. The answer is absolutely unequivocally yes, and I wish I could give you more information than I can, and some of the information that's been done, some of the work that's been done has never been released, but we've seen it, which puts us in a slightly awkward situation. But just to give context, 16% of all apologies, more technical issues, but so Chris, I don't know how much you caught of that, so I'm just going to give you that answer again. The 14% of Western Cape produces 14% of South Africa's revenue, or 14% of GDP. we have 12% of South Africa's population, and of the money that's allocated to provinces, we receive 10%. So we're paying 14% in, we're getting 10% back, and therefore we're currently subsidising the rest of South Africa. There are 2 provinces that subsidise the other 7, the Gauteng and the Western Cape. So in terms of flows that are there has been an economic impact study done, but it wasn't done by us. And whilst we have a copy, it's never been made public, but it shows considerable, in fact, more than most people had imagined, that tax flows from the Western Cape into South Africa. And in terms of economic size, then we're in a situation where the Western Cape, comparison-wise, our economy is roughly the size of Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe combined. So there's absolutely no question whatsoever that the Western Cape economy is big enough and strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet, and in actual fact will be considerably better off after independence, because we will no longer be subsidising effectively the sort of the corruption and mismanagement that goes on in South Africa, and we'll be able to direct those resources inwardly. And I think with sensible economic policies, we're going to see the Western Cape really thrive. And we've got to think that over the last 10 years, South Africa has had an average economic growth rate of 0.9% and a population growth rate of 1.2%. So we can all work out that everybody is getting poorer if our population is growing faster than our economy. And actually, we need to be looking in the Western Cape and targeting growth rates of around 10%, which we've seen in the likes of Rwanda and elsewhere where that is possible. And there are many examples of economies that have absolutely blossomed after independence, and 2 obvious ones would be Singapore and more recently Estonia. But okay, yeah, so I think we are definitely not an issue. Hi, first curious about how many votes will they need to make an impact? Great question. So the new party, so we would be targeting 100,000 votes. That's an enormous challenge, I have to say. So I think that's an ambitious target. Or certainly be enough to bring the DA below the critical figure of 48%. And we think that's the critical figure to force a referendum using method 1, which is directly forcing the DA into a coalition government. I think there are 2 options. So the first option would be if we can bring the DA down under 48%. That effectively denies that one coalition partner that the DA could use that would allow them to evade Cape independence, and that's the ACDP, who've got about 1.8 to 1.9% of the vote. They support federalism, but they oppose Cape independence, and they happily will vote with the DA. So once we get below that 48% mark, the DA does not have another suitable partner, and its primary coalition partner is the Freedom Front Plus. But Dr. Corné Mulder has already gone on record, and he's a close ally of the CIAG, and has gone on record and said that they were very happy to form a coalition government with the DA. They're currently in 11 of the 15 hung municipalities in the Western Cape, and the Freedom Front Plus are in 11 with the DA, so they're already an existing coalition partner, and they've said that a referendum on Cape independence will be a condition of their support. So once we start to below that 48%, then the DA runs out of options. It's not going to form an agreement with the ANC. Clearly, it's not going to form an agreement with the PA or Good, all of whom it's fallen out with, and that really leaves of the Cape independence movement, and that would be the Freedom Front Plus. And actually, we recognise this 100,000 votes, once taken away from the DA, would tip that balance. So that would be first choice. To put that into context, there are only 3 parties who've ever got 100,000 votes in the Western Cape: the DA, the ANC, and COPE the first time they voted. So it's not something we've taken lightly. But actually, we do think we have the wherewithal to do that. That would be the first prize, 100,000 votes. Then as we start to drop off that, actually then the next number, it becomes critical, is 85,000 votes. And 85,000 votes, that would give us 2 seats in the National Assembly and 3 seats in the Provincial Assembly, which would be very, very significant. It would allow us to make a complete nuisance of ourselves. And then dropping down, the minimum number really is 30,000, and that's we're just waiting on this final outcome of the electoral changes, because the Western Cape Parliament is being expanded. We're anticipating, the IEC are anticipating that's completed before the 2024 elections. So the sort of the bottom number is 30,000 votes, and at 30,000 votes, that would give us a dedicated MP or MEP into the provincial parliament, which would allow us then to habitually table motions calling for referendum on Cape independence, to generally bring Cape independence as to part of the daily fabric of our parliamentary processes, which would be incredibly powerful. So 100,000 is the key number. 85 is very good parliamentary wise. That would be superb too. And anything less than 30%, anything less than 30,000 would then be very, very problematic. But we're confident of the 100,000, but we're not taking it for granted. It's a huge ask. Okay, so what should good question, thank you. What should happen if a referendum is denied? What's the next step? And I think we're talking now, I presume, about the DA denying a referendum. And in many ways, I think in fact, I was talking to a colleague yesterday about this, and I used the example of, we were talking about the story from the Bible of Moses and the Pharaohs, and sort of constantly having to sort of go back and up the ante. And I think that's very much the relationship that we have with the DA. We relatively cordial relationship, but we're going to have to keep upping the ante. So if it's denied, then we'll announce this political party shortly afterwards, and we'll work together with particularly the Freedom Front Plus, and to a lesser extent the Cape Independence Party, to build up pressure that way. And obviously, if the option is that we force the DA into a coalition government with Cape Independence, that would be first prize. And if we don't, then we'll go into the provincial parliament and we'll start to drive motions. But ultimately, once we've got into the parliamentary space, our primary role as the CIAG has always been a lobby group, and we'll continue to do that. This really then sort of moves into a different sphere if we start to take part in party political politics. Look, it wouldn't be the CIAG that would do that, but we would have a strong influence and hand on the organisation to do it. Then a lot of that is going to start falling down to voters and for people. And I think that clearly running up to the election, we absolutely want to get as many voters as possible. After the election, I think we're likely to see that the national coalition game has just fallen apart. There is absolutely zero prospect that we're going to have a national government that doesn't have the ANC featuring strongly in it. And I think once that happens and we get into post 2024 and people start to see the reality of what comes next, we would anticipate a really, really strong swing towards Cape independence. So 2024 is pretty critical, but it's not the be all and end all, because when we come out the other side, almost certainly the push factors will have amplified exponentially. Those first 6 months after the election are going to be fascinating. What role can young people? Robert King, for those of you who don't know, Robert King runs the Cape Youth Front. So this is quite a loaded question, but an excellent one. So Robert, the answer you want me to give is the answer I'm going to give. They should join the Cape Youth Front, and they should lend their voice to this movement. And I think the voice of the youth is particularly powerful because one of the key issues. And I was having an interesting discussion today with a political analyst, and we were talking about obviously Cape independence in 2024 particularly, and the role that people play. And one of the key discussions that we were focusing on is the future. What is the difference? In terms of what is it that, for example, DA voters are likely to persuade them to vote against the DA on the basis of Cape independence? And the answer is the future. The DA have done a good job at running the Western Cape. And actually, in many ways, they have got a level of de facto independence. But now we kind of have to protect that, and we have to sort of codify that, and we have to consolidate. Because if we don't, then all of those gains will quite quickly be lost. And we recognise with this huge changing of people migrating to the province, the illegal migration, I should say. There's absolutely nothing wrong with legal migration, but mass illegal migration to the province. And actually, we know from polling and research that's been done that many of the people that are coming to the Western Cape, from our own polling, and actually showed up, are actively voting against the DA. They want to get the DA out. So actually, if we don't get to a solution, if we don't do Cape independence, then this kind of beneficial, this special environment we've created in the Western ultimately won't last, and young people particularly affected by that. So I think that people play a critical role to play. I know you're doing great work on the university campuses. I think you're starting to get a foothold in UCT, and people should definitely look up the Cape Youth Front on Twitter and to see what you're doing and to join you doing this. Okay, hi, Green Phantom. Okay, good question. So the honest answer is I don't know. I think it'll be bigger than the Western Cape, and actually that probably is the answer that you're wanting to hear, and I can probably help you that, and I think you'll get the answer that you want. So, what do we think is going to happen? For many reasons, we're fighting initially just for the Western Cape, and that as much as anything is for legal reasons, which is the Western Cape exists. It's very easy to show that the Western Cape is an ideological view to the rest of South Africa. It votes differently. It's rejected the ANC. It's got a border. It's got a government. We know who's in. We know who's out. So that's the starting point. So I think the first point of this process is that we have to get a referendum in the Western Cape. We have to win it. And then we have to sort of set in motion this notion that, okay, there now is going to be a Cape of Good Hope. And that's phase one. And that doesn't include, in my mind, the Northern Cape or the Eastern Cape, because we haven't got to that point. We're going to create a country, but we haven't created a country. Then once we start those discussions, and now all of a sudden it became clear and we're negotiating with the South African government, and we're in the process of forming the Cape of Good Hope, then suddenly where the border falls becomes very relevant. And what we would love to see from that point of view is a series of referendums at municipal level along the border, which ultimately says to people along that border, well, which side of it do you want to be on, so that we end up defining that border democratically. And if we look at a voting map of South Africa, it's very clear that a large portion of the Northern Cape and about 25% of the Eastern Cape, certainly the westernmost proportion, habitually reject the ANC too and vote along the same lines as the Western Cape. And therefore it will be our view that ultimately those regions would be included in the Cape of Good Hope from the outset. In other words, not at the initial referendum, but by the time the country actually closes the border and declares itself independent, that those regions will be part of the territory, because they would be part of these secondary referendums. But obviously the degree of speculation on that, and obviously that will depend on how that process plays out. But I think that's almost inevitable. It will be very difficult, I think, once we agree to a Cape independence, to force communities to be on the side of the border they don't want to be. So I don't know in terms of exactly where on the map how far that comes out towards PE, but if you just Google a voting map of South Africa, and normally it's yellow and green, and you'll very quickly see where that line is, and then you can see, I can't say how people are going to vote, but I can see how they have voted, and I doubt they'll change their minds. You have to stay there. Yeah. So in terms of the referendum, absolutely. Unfortunately, the referendum will be. We have to be registered here. Let me rephrase that. So you're only registered to vote in one place, and when we hold a referendum on Cape independence, it will include registered voters in the Western Cape only. And I suspect, well, first of all, let's say if we manage to get this existing call, which I don't think we will, but if we can manage to get this existing call on election day 2024, then it makes it very easy, because everybody who's voting in the provincial election in the Western Cape also gets to vote in the Cape independence referendum. I think if we go to some point in the future and the referendum is called a bit later, then we'll have to make some decisions on that. But I think probably backdating the voters' roll to the 2024 elections might be sensible, because we're going to have to guard against vote rigging, and masses of people from outside the Western Cape registering in the Western Cape to vote, effectively to deny Cape independence. So it'd be an interesting one. Short answer is yes, you at least have to be registered in the Western Cape to vote. Now, obviously, if people have got holiday homes and so on, and they choose in 2024 to make that their primary residence, and they vote in the 2024 elections here, then clearly that would have them registered to vote in the Western Cape. But you can only be registered in one place to vote. So that hasn't been decided yet. Like I say, that party hasn't officially been formed. Look, it has been getting its processes and procedures and so on together for the last few months, so it's at quite an advanced stage, but it's not ready to be launched yet. Once that happens, then the membership will elect the leadership of the party, and they'll elect a leader, and whoever gets elected to be leader of the party will be leader of the party. So I have some idea that's likely to be, but at this point in time, we don't know. And as I say, the CIAG, we won't be that political party. The CIAG will continue to exist as the CIAG and play this role, and it supports all parties and organisations that support Cape independence. We're just very glad to see and have encouraged the formation of this other party, and have worked with existing parties. As I say, this isn't an antagonistic move; it's strategic. So we work quite hard with the group that are organising that party, because its success in many ways is going to be our success. Yeah, interesting one. So, yes, the national government can simply refuse independence, and many national governments have refused. In fact, that probably would be a normal expectation. Um, but there's a question beyond that, which says, well, does that actually matter? One of the things, and I'm always wary when I hear people talking about the sort of the international law and the internet, how these things play out, and people are asking about, well, what's the process? And somebody says, look, yeah, it's very definitely this happens and that happens and that happens, and there it is, because these things just don't work out that way. And you can go and look. There are many, many more secessions than people ever realise. You can go and Google and see this is really quite a regular occurrence, and almost in every case that they have a unique path, so because the circumstances are always different. The bottom line is that all people have a right to self-determination. That's a matter of fact. The statement of law, it's something South Africa has acceded to. The Western Cape qualify as a people, or they qualify as a people because the Western Cape is the only province with its own constitution, and the first line of the Western Cape Constitution says, "In humble submission to Almighty God, we, the people of the Western Cape." So there's no question the Western Cape exists as a people in the context of international law. There's no question that all people have a right to self-determination, because that's very clear, and South Africa has repeatedly sworn it. So there's absolutely a right to independence. And we also know from some of the international judgments, including, and the key ones there, so in 2010, the International Court of Justice made it clear that there's no prohibition on the unilateral declaration of independence. So therefore, if the Western Cape wants to declare itself independent, that's not illegal. That's a last resort, and I think people who want to rush to EDI are perhaps naive. That gets very, very messy, and I think that's the last resort. But actually, it's useful to have it as a threat. It's a legal threat. It's something that's possible. And then you actually end up in this in-between space where you kind of, ultimately, it's like a divorce. One party may not want to have the divorce, but ultimately, if the other party is adamant it's going to divorce, it's impossible to stop it. And some of those negotiations become fraught, but ultimately they're going to happen. And that's far more likely how this is going to play out. And one of the interesting things, both the Supreme Court of Canada and the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom have considered the question of referendums and whether they're binding. And in South African constitution and most constitutions, referendums are binding. But what both those courts have said, considering international law, is that, look, you simply can't ignore the outcome of a referendum in a democracy. It doesn't really matter whether it's binding or not. If you've got a democracy and the majority vote for something as significant as independence, you cannot just simply ignore it. So I think there's, if we can get a referendum and win it, everything's on our side. It's very, very difficult for South Africa to deny that, and I think almost certainly that would open up the door to significant sanctions and international pressure should South Africa deny. So I've always said from the start, and I would say this: if we get a referendum or a referendum, we'll get independence. It may not go smoothly in between, and we might have to get the international community on our side, and it might be a bit messy, but we'll get it done. Yeah. Okay. Good question. So no. The honest answer is, so this is, and look, this is something we expect. So the DA are they have this standard scheme elections without question. You will be bombarded in 2024 with SMSs and messages from the DA's immense election budget telling you must vote for the DA, otherwise you're going to get back in. Yeah, and one of the more laughable ones. I live in a safe DA ward, and the last election I got an SMS from the DA saying the DA are all it's neck and neck with the ANC. Please go and vote now, because it's neck and neck with the ANC. When the results were announced, it was 98% in favour of the DA. It'd just been a complete lie. And actually, that's an obvious lie. This is a less obvious lie, a slightly cleverer one. But we have this system in South Africa, at provincial level now and national level of proportional representation. So there's absolutely no prospect in there whether the DA get 50% of the vote and the Freedom Front get nothing, or will the DA get 45% of the vote and the Freedom Front plus get 5% of the vote of the former coalition. Neither of those let the ANC in. The only way that the ANC are going to get back in is if somebody votes for the ANC or one of its allies. Well, I absolutely guarantee that any party we're involved in will never vote with the ANC. And in fact, ironically, the party that's most likely to vote with the ANC is the DA itself, who many people are saying are privately conducting, and I think that credibly so, these discussions, because the reality at the national level, let's come away from regional level, there's no possible prospect of the ANC coming back into power in the Western Cape, none whatsoever. So that would just, this is all really about, well, is this going to be the DA with an outright majority, or is the DA going to get into power and continue to be the government and the dominant part of that government, but it relies on a couple of smaller parties who support Cape independence to put it into power? At a national level, that looks very different. And the reality is that in 2019, there were 48 political parties that contested the national election. 3 of them got 89% of the vote between them. That was the ANC, the DA, and the EFF, and the remaining 45 shared the last 11%. So that those 45 were largely irrelevant. Because the big 3 have got 89%, and there is no mathematical possibility of forming a government either without the ANC, which has that dominant power, or already 2 of those. So your options are, if the ANC drops to say 40%, then realistically the only option is the DA and the ANC, or the EFF and the ANC, or the DA and the EFF. That's the only real possibility. And the DA have many times floated this idea, and I think they, what I expect from the DA is that they are going to encourage people to vote for this coalition, because it's the best possible chance of unseating the ANC. It has no prospect of success whatsoever, but it has great of convincing people to vote for the DA, because you're voting for the hope that maybe it can, and you don't want to be responsible for not happening. And when that's finished, then you're going to sit in this situation where potentially you have this balance of power, and the DA are going to say, well, look, what do you want, an ANC EFF government or an ANC DA government? And I think they've made their decision already. And one of the interesting things you'll see in those coalition negotiations, that the other parties are trying to force the DA into saying that they won't make a deal with the ANC after the election, and the DA are refusing to do so, except on very carefully worded terms, because they know fine well exactly what they plan to do. So that's very interesting. So that's slightly aside, and that's a national dynamic. Here in the local, there is no possible prospect of an ANC government coming back to the Western Cape. We will have a DA, whatever happens, we'll have a DA government. You can make this absolutely go, whether you like them or hate them, the DA are going to be in government. The only possibility is do they have an outright majority, or are they forced into a coalition with some smaller parties? Those smaller parties are likely to be very helpful to Cape independence support, because they're going to be the Freedom Front Plus, potentially this new party sort of thing, or the ACDP, and even the ACDP, although they don't support Cape independence, are a federal party and part of the devolution group, and are definitely in this camp of greater autonomy. So these smaller parties are likely to help Cape independence rather than hinder them. But obviously, from the DA's perspective, they would rather have an outright majority, of course. Yeah, good. Fair question, and yeah, and I think it's an uncomfortable question at times, but it's a question that's on everybody's lips, and the honest answer is we're going to have to close the border. There's no question that when we create a Cape of Good Hope, we're going to have to control immigration into and actually the reality we should be controlling it now. And I think there's and I always wanted to. I myself I'm an immigrant. I was not born in South Africa. I immigrated, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite. But actually, I did so legally. I went. I filled out my forms. I did my fees. I provided all the documents. I came and I bought property and so on and so forth. So I came legally, and I'm hopefully I've contributed in the time that I've been here. And I think that's the same. So let's draw a distinction between legal migration, which tends to be quite good for most countries. You need people coming into your economy, and you can control who comes, what skills they bring, on what terms they come, and that's normal. And obviously illegal immigration. And obviously we have got this massive issue of both undocumented foreigners and also internal migrants who are settling land illegally and then using resources that should be allocated to the people that are here legally. So these are both massive issues, and yeah, we must make those race issues, but they are real law and order issues, and they have to be dealt with. And closing the border is an essential component of Cape independence. And no question, you have the referendum, you create the country, you close the border, and that's that, and then it must apply to come in. And I think we must have a fair system. We must be fair to the people that are already here. We must allow people to sort of formalise their arrangements and so on. So that must be sympathetic, and it must be humane, and it definitely mustn't be racist. But actually, we do have to control our population. So and that's an issue that many countries around the world deal with, and clearly it's going to be an issue in the Western Cape. Look, we have got some, or I've got pride. We have some thought on what should be done, but probably I don't some, yes, it's an issue. We'll have to deal with it. Yes, we have to deal with it. The Patriotic Alliance, I assume you're meeting. Well, yeah, I guess there is. For some reason, we've never managed to develop any form of. We're very good. We have relations with most political parties, and we've just completely failed when it comes to the Patriotic Alliance. I have had conversation. I had an initial conversation with Mackenzie. Actually, a very cordial relationship. I thought we got on great, and the next thing I know, he was lining up pot shots in the media at me, and actually has never really spoken to me since. So I really don't know what happened. I suspect that was of a political nature. But there we go. But for example, Corné Mulder, who's a key part of the independence movement, has an excellent relationship with Gates and Mackenzie. And so Corné works that angle constantly, and certainly I hope I'm not speaking out of turn in quoting him. His belief is that in time the Patriotic Alliance will come round to Cape independence, given the how important it is to the survival of the Western Cape, and obviously the Patriotic Alliance is primarily a coloured party, and in Cape independence has now really strong support amongst the coloured community, and ultimately is critical to them, because in many ways, one of the things I've often said when you look at things like affirmative action. A white person, I and my colleagues who are white get frustrated at affirmative action because it seems unfair, but the impact on us pales into insignificance when compared to the impact on the coloured community because of their concentration in the Western Cape. I think ultimately we are likely to see that, but I don't think anytime soon. I don't think even before this election, let me say that way. I've heard lots of people say they can't. I've never read the regulation. I have absolutely no idea. But I think, frankly, it's probably if there is an issue, it's simply administrative. So for argument's sake, I think if the country is split up, I think the DA would continue to operate in both countries. Would one of those become the Cape Alliance rather than the Democratic Alliance? probably, and effectively, would they continue to have links? I guess that's no different to argument about, let's for argument's sake, Scottish independence. Well, look, the Labour parties on both sides of the border, parties on both sides of the border. Once you put independence, they suddenly stop to exist in the other country. Of course, they don't. But do they then have to create different structures because they're operating in a different political system? Probably. So I think that's what we would see. Yeah, look, thanks, Mario. I think that's another question, and I would love to have somebody from the DA to come on and answer that. Um, I, I think it's just the best I can say is I think it's just uncomfortable. And actually, I've done a lot of negotiating with the DA myself over the years, and what I found is that I have found quite enthusiastic about something at the start. And then actually, as it becomes more and more real, they get less and less enthusiastic. And I think the DA are quite timid, is the honest answer. So that ultimately are overly cautious. And we've seen that around the People's Bill, we've seen this at the referendum. So a lot of these things, when we first talked to them, that really we're all on the same page, we're all happy. Federalism was something else we had discussions around. And ultimately, when it comes to the nitty gritty, they are always just shy away from anything that's too controversial. And I think that's the situation in the referendum. Ironically, they say, look, our 70% of our voters are outside of the Western Cape. And one of the things that we've always said is that we've polled your voters outside of the Western Cape because our anecdotal evidence is people outside of the Western Cape are even more keen on Cape independence than people inside of it. They know what the alternative looks like. So it's funny insisting with this, we can be the party of the national government, which is just really odd, because the issue is not the DA. The issue is that voters don't want the DA to be the national government. They've made it absolutely clear, and we've seen just how terrible this ANC is. Here we are in a situation where there is nobody has any misunderstanding of just how bad and corrupt the ANC are, and yet the rest outside of the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa, their voters are 2 or 3 times more likely to vote for the ANC, even knowing what they know now. And if people are not willing to elect a government now in the rest of South Africa, they're never ever going to elect a government. And I think that they have to recognise that it has a different role to play in the rest of South Africa than it does in the Western Cape. And I think it's really missing a trick, because I agree with you. I think we're not a party, but we're not a party. I'm not lined up any particular party, and actually we have many our leadership team all vote for different parties. So it's not really, but I mean the statistics say that if we get independence, the DA are likely to be the first government, and it'll be from there to lose. And they'll be able to implement all of the policies that they want to implement that they can't implement now. It is a bit funny, but there isn't. I think it's just timidity. No, I don't think so. So I think the same thing cuts both ways. I think, look, we have to, and I do see these comments often. I think, looking at ban the ANC, ban the FF, and I would be really against both of those. I think we live in a democracy. And that you have to accept, that not everybody agrees. That's the whole point of the system. And actually, the problem with our democracy in South Africa is that the national party, actually we just have such diverse views that we sort of can't reach as a consensus. But in the Western Cape, I think we have to allow our democracy to develop, and I think all political parties should be able to, provided they behave themselves. I absolutely wouldn't condone the conduct of people like Julius Malema, and actually I would like to think that in the case of Good Hope, he would be in prison and rather in Parliament because of his conduct. But that doesn't mean that political parties, if they behave themselves, and either behave as abide by the law of the land, the same as everybody else, then great. There's the possibility of formal cousin. Well, I don't know about formal. I'm not sure there's too much to do at this point in time, but informally that already exists. Yes. Yeah, there are four Cape Independence organisations that work very closely together, and that is the two political parties that exist: Freedom Front Plus and the Cape Independence Party, Cape Exit, and then the CIAG. We work closely together. And certainly, if this new party emerges, necessary, and I think it's almost certainly going to be necessary, and therefore almost certainly going to emerge, then that party will absolutely work together with the other political parties in that space. In other words, the point was creating a new political party and then competing with the Freedom Front Plus for votes. The idea then would be to target DA voters who support Cape independence and create a party that will be relatively sympathetic to the DA's policies, but actually want to hold their feet to the flame on Cape independence, so that then when it comes to post the elections, the Freedom Front Plus and this new party and the Cape Independence Party, to the extent that it's not always been that successful. So, but those three parties then collectively come with a large share of the vote, and so yes, I think there's going to be a coalition. I think it's going to be an informal one to start off with, but obviously after the elections, if it's successful, that will turn into a formal coalition government. How do we secure our borders once we're free? Look, there are lots of look. I think there's a balance. So I don't have all of the answers. I'm not a security expert. There are plenty of people who do have solutions to these. But let me just kind of say there's a balance, and that balance isn't really physically. So, for example, if you really want to make it absolutely certain that nobody comes into your country, or if they do, they can't conduct any business here, that isn't that difficult. The problem is you have to have then such draconian measures that your genuine citizens have no freedom. We could easily make it so that if you didn't have an ID number, or you didn't have that you couldn't buy stuff, or you couldn't put your child in school, or that's all well and good, but obviously we then all of a sudden we're living in that sort of 1984 state as well. So actually, I think it's more a question of, well, what's that balance? What's a sensible balance between protecting our borders and maintaining a lifestyle of freedom that allows us to sort of go about our business without feeling that we're living in a sort of a paramilitary state. But I think there's going to be a mixture. I think effectively, obviously, clearly there's going to be some physical protection of the borders. I think there's an awful lot of new technology that assists. I think we're going to have to see the sort of emergence of these sort of, bearing in mind a lot of our borders are in farmland, so sort of commando type structures that assist the police. And then I think there's going to be an awful lot of digital stuff that says, right, well, even if you get over the border, we're going to make life very, very difficult for you when you've arrived in India, so that actually it's not much fun living here because you just can't interact. And of course, if you have a justice system that is functioning properly, that also is a huge advantage. But we mustn't kid ourselves. That doesn't mean it's easy, because we can look at all these countries around the world, massive problems they're having with immigration, and it's going to be a challenge for them, and it's a challenge for us. Does feel glad to get have the momentum to clear all boundaries. No, not yet. I think the Cape Independence movement has done extraordinarily well in the last 3 years, and I think it's now been established as it's been established as an option. It's in the political discourse. I think it's increasingly seen as less lunatic and more mainstream. And I think organisations like ours have done a good job of showing people that we can be sensible, saying this is just really a logical and a sensible policy to have, and we can conduct ourselves sensibly, and integrate ourselves into sort of the mainstream. We've got this bill going through Parliament. We've been involved in the devolution working group. We have managed to really make this thing We've put it, can't say front and centre. We've established it in the discourse. What we haven't got is made it the thing that basically is spontaneous yet. At the end of the day, it's not like we're seeing spontaneous protests on the street and other things spring up everywhere. The Cape Independence Party hasn't done particularly well up until now, so there are challenges. So I think we're doing really, really well at this point in time, but actually we need to find another gear. And I think Cape Independence has been one or two gears, which is great, and we're ramping upwards. But I think we've got an awful lot to do yet, and I think 2024 form the new party rather than Goliath. The odds are stacked against us. It's not an easy thing for us to do, but we must just remember that David won, and I think we'll win too. There's a lot of work to be done, and we can play our part. But actually, our people who support Cape Independence are absolutely going to have to get out and roll up their sleeves and join in. This isn't going to be something that's going to be a spectator sport. Cape Independence isn't going to happen if it's left to sort of the 40 or 50 people who are the sort of the involved in these groups visibly. It has to sort of move across onto the streets, and that's something that's very much in our mind. But yeah, we need to find another gear still. Okay, all right. I think that's the